From Washington, this is VOA News. Secretary of State Kerry heads to China, and the U.S. slaps Russian officials with human rights sanctions. I'm David Byrd reporting from Washington. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry heads to Beijing Saturday for talks with Chinese officials. As VOA Steve Herman reports, the tensions on the Korean Peninsula are high on the Secretary's agenda.
Kerry's next stop is Beijing, and while in Seoul he emphasized the Chinese government must put some teeth into ensuring North Korean denuclearization.
China has an enormous ability to help make a difference here. And I hope that in our conversations when I get there tomorrow, we'll be able to lay out a path ahead that can defuse this tension.
North Korea, after conducting a missile launch and a nuclear test in the past few months, has in short order unleashed a string of threats against Seoul and Washington. These have included renouncing the 1953 ceasefire, which halted the Korean War, threatening to launch a preemptive nuclear attack on the United States, and declaring a state of war in effect between the North and South. Steve Herman, VOA News, Seoul.
For more on this story, please be sure to log on to our website, voanews.com. The United States has imposed sanctions on 18 people for human rights abuses in accordance with a law enacted in December. The law is intended to punish Russian officials involved in the imprisonment and death of lawyer Sergei Magnitsky. The 18 people named are now subject to visa bans and asset freezes. Most of them are Russian officials accused of involvement in the Magnitsky case. White House spokesman Jay Carney on Friday said those responsible for Magnitsky's death cannot be allowed to escape unscathed.
The 2009 death of lawyer Sergei Magnitsky in pretrial detention in Moscow was a tragedy, and the investigation into his death has yielded no visible result. Russian officials implicated directly in Magnitsky's imprisonment and prison officials directly involved in decisions that led to his death remain unpunished.
Sergei Magnitsky was a Russian lawyer who was arrested after exposing a state embezzlement scheme. He died in prison in 2009 after being beaten and denied medical treatment. Sudan's President Omar al-Bashir is in South Sudan's capital for talks aimed at improving relations, which have warmed somewhat since the countries nearly went to war last year. South Sudan's President Salva Kiir greeted Mr. Bashir at the Juba airport on Friday. The two men later held closed-door talks that Sudan's news agency says focused on implementing recent economic and political cooperation agreements. The United Nations Refugee Agency is expressing alarm at the rising number of Syrian refugees it says are returning home from Jordan. As Lisa Schlein reports from Geneva, the UNHCR says some 3,000 refugees have returned to areas of Syria that the aid agency considers unsafe.
UNHCR spokeswoman Melissa Fleming says an average of 300 people a day have been returning to villages close to the border in the Syrian region of Dara. She says the refugees say they believe their villages have been liberated and it is now safe for them to go home.
We're concerned that nothing is safe in Syria right now. We're also concerned because in these areas there are extreme shortages of food, there's lack of fuel, electricity, and other services.
Fleming says, however, that new arrivals to Jordan continue to outpace those going back to Syria. Lisa Schlein for VOA News, Geneva.
European Union finance ministers are pushing ahead with plans to bail out Cyprus and stabilize Europe's banking sector. Ministers meeting in Dublin, Ireland Friday faced some questions following reports that the cost of the Cyprus bailout had jumped by several $billions. But EU Monetary Affairs Commissioner Olli Rehn said that such worries were not justified.
People have been comparing apples with pears and coming up with oranges. I will refrain from remarking that this is what happens when stories are written based on leaked documents.
The bailout deal that Cyprus patched together with international lenders must still be approved by the parliaments of several EU countries. And American comedian Jonathan Winters, who was known for his wild improvisations and sound effects, has died of natural causes at age 87. The Ohio-born Winters was a welcome guest on television, variety, talk, and game shows for nearly 50 years. He was able to create comedy characters and routines on the spot. For more, log on to voanews.com. I'm David Byrd in Washington.